This season of the Good Up podcast is sponsored by Empath Psychological Services. Good Up is our space to talk about those experiences in life we didn't know we all had in common. We're the after work happy hour conversation with your best friend.
You good up vibe, like, hello.
The place where you bring up the hard parts of life, the ones that made you laugh, and the things that made you who you are. Because who said becoming good up wasn't a little bit uncomfortable? Stay tuned for more information about this week's episode.
Here at the Good Up Pod, we're all about shedding light on life experiences that have contributed to who we are and learning to navigate them to find a feeling that's, good up.
For some of us, that journey includes therapy. Empath Psychological Services operates with the belief that life's challenges are not all of who we are.
They aim to create a non-judgmental environment to help their clients harness their own power and to find their path to mental well-being. Good Up and Empath Psychological Services share a passion for helping others navigate their own healing their way.
If you're interested in teletherapy services in the U.S. Virgin Islands or the state of Texas, check out the link in the description box for more information on how you can book a session with Empath Psychological Services. Hey, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of the Good Up motherfucking podcast. I'm your host, also known as Islandari's Passion Fruit Juice, because that's what I've been thinking about all day. Deidre knows. She knows. And Deidre, who are you this week?
Oxtail bone.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Was that off the top of your head, or have you been
because I was unprepared and I was like, I need something relative, but also not.
Oxtail bone is fine. Okay, the girls love oxtail and we support oxtail. So
and the girls who get it.
Girls who don't exactly. So we're so happy to be back, because we're always happy to be back. And thank you to those of you who have been showing love on last week's episode, who shared it on social media, who shared all your commentary. And thank you to our patrons. Y'all have had the group chat lit, and y'all, your commentary is always hilarious. So as a reminder, you can join us for those shenanigans by becoming a Patreon over at patreon.com/gooduppodcast. And with that being said, let's get into this week's episode. So I have a spiel, I have a soapbox before I get into this episode. Good Up has always served as a safe space to talk about those experiences in life we didn't know we all had in common. So Deidre and I live at an intersection of multiple identities, and we understand what it's like to be treated as subhuman by people in positions of privilege and power. And I've personally, again, been very disappointed to see some recent conversations on my social media feeds regarding gender identity and trans womanhood. And a lot of you have been letting that bigotry jump out on full display. And so I'm here to tell you now, if it wasn't already clear, that if you don't see trans women as women, this is not the podcast for you. Okay, you can go ahead and unsubscribe. You can unfollow.
If you're a patron, you can take your money back, babe. We don't want it.
Yeah.
You can keep your money, babe.
I don't want your dollar. It's fine. I just needed to put that out there, because I think sometimes people are scared to come out and say that for fear of losing something, and there's nothing to lose by supporting trans women.
So y'all can keep it.
Thank you for that. So today we're bringing someone to the mic who intimately understands the trans experience, specifically that of Black trans women. And I've known her since undergrad, and I'm really grateful that she's joined us to share more about her journey, because both her career and her personal journey have been truly amazing to witness. I've known this girl since like 2016. I remember winning the last pageant that I ran for, and the first person that I talked to on stage was this girl. And I just remember feeling so like, oh my God, you're such a cool person. So it's really full circle to have her here with us today. And I also wanted to be clear that Daric has not been brought here to speak on behalf of all trans women. She's only speaking from her experience, in the same way that Deidre and I can't speak on behalf of all Black women or all Caribbean women. With that being said, I would like to turn the mic over to Daric for her to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Daric L. Cottingham, she, her, they, them pronouns, and I am an entertainment and cultural journalist by way of the South, and currently based here in Los Angeles, California.
Yes, for LA. How are you liking LA?
LA is sometimes like a movie, a good one or a bad one, and that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that is a very good description of
that's
LA.
real.
That is a very, very good description of LA. So thank you for being here with us. I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have today. But before I start, I want to get into some stats. Deidre, know that I do this every time we have an episode on topics on different social issues. So I want to start here. Okay. So the intersection of race with gender identity and sexuality presents a unique set of challenges for Black Americans. According to a Pew Research survey, 79% of adults say they experience discrimination because of their race. However, the nature of discrimination changes when we have multiple identities. We've talked about intersectionality before on this podcast. So the word of today is intersectionality because some of y'all don't understand it. So,
and if you don't know what it means when you tell the cab driver, meet me at the corner of West and 7th.
Okay.
Two different streets, same corner.
West might be your gender identity, 7th might be your ethnic or racial background. There are intersections. So different mixtures of identities produce different and often worse experiences of inequality. So now we're thinking about the intersection of LGBTQ plus Americans, of trans people, of Black trans people specifically. So while about 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus Americans report that they have experienced discrimination in the year prior, LGBTQ plus people of color are more likely to report discrimination than any kind of LGBTQ plus people. And since 2013, over 300 transgender and non-binary people have been victims of fatal violence. 2/3 of those victims have been Black transgender women. 1 in 4 Black transgender and non-binary young people have reported a suicide attempt in the past year. And Black transgender and non-binary young people experience higher rates of victimization, attempts from others to change their sexual orientation or gender identity, and housing instability compared to Black cisgender LGBTQ plus people. So why am I reading off all of these stats? I'm reading off all of these stats because I want to start the conversation for anyone who comes into this space with any kind of hesitance. I want to start it with facts so that you know nobody here is talking about experiences that do not exist, that are not real, that have not been proven. This is not a matter of opinion. Before we go into this conversation, again, wanted to open the space for that, wanted to make sure I put that out there. And I'm going to start with this question, and this is for the group. Of course, Daric, I will invite you to the mic first. Did you grow up, or had you ever been introduced to someone who identified as transgendered growing up?
Growing up, no. And that's because I grew up in the South, grew up in a Baptist household. So the possibility model for me to even be my full self was not present for a really, really long time. I think the closest I might have seen it was maybe androgyny and with drag racing. But it was never like in tangent, like I have a neighbor or I have a family friend or anything in my physical life. It was things that I saw within media. So yeah, it was not something that was highly discussed, growing up in Louisiana and Texas in the South. And so it definitely wasn't something that I really ever saw as a possibility to be able to live in my own truth because I didn't get to really see it as a.
What about you, Deidre? Did you know anyone back home who identified as trans or could possibly have identified as trans?
So 2 people come to mind. One, we didn't know this person to be trans during our upbringing. You know what I mean? So I didn't have anybody in my upbringing that I could reference that would be trans. Now as a grown lady, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is somebody I know who is trans. I just didn't find out until later in life. There's one other person, I will not say this person's name because this person has never come out as trans, but there's, and for lack of a better term, confusion on my part on this person's gender identity. But it's somebody who I always grew up, who we all knew to be born a female. So growing up, we just always knew this person to be a lesbian. But as we all got older, this person eventually kind of shortened their name to something more masculine that was just like a shorter version of the name they were given at birth. And so again, it's easy to say, maybe this is just a trans man, but this person has never come out and said, I am a trans man. So I'm going to respect that and just say, hey, I don't know. But that's the closest I've ever come to knowing somebody who could potentially be trans. Like that's all I got. Because same, just like you, Daric, I grew up in the Caribbean. So
Yeah.
there was, and Caribbean and Southern American, it's not too far off.
It's not. We're cousins.
We're cousins,
We
baby.
really are.
Yeah.
We're cousins. So yeah.
I would want to clarify, it sounds like the second person that you're describing, they could either be trans, they also could be non-binary, they could just be one that does not subscribe to the gender binary that we're taught.
Right.
This is what a male is supposed to act like. This is what a female is supposed to act like. And that's kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah. And granted,
we fall under the same umbrella.
Yeah.
So when you are non-binary, when you're trans, it's under the same umbrella. Anytime you are going beyond the binary, they will fall under there. So they could be full on, as it depends on if they are using just a gendered pronoun that's binary, but then they them, or is open to all pronouns that would make them more non-binary. But that's something for them to disclose and share. But I wanted to give clarity that, like, sometimes they could be a trans man, or they could still also be identifying as non-binary. Still falls under the trans and non-binary like umbrella of side of the gender binary. It's so expansive, the same way as sexuality is expansive. So yeah.
Thank you for that clarification, because I think in Caribbean culture, or in my upbringing at least, there are so many individuals who identify outside of the gender binary. I think is probably the best way for me to describe it. Or there are women, family members that I have, who still identify as women and dress in a masculine manner, or have changed their names, or it's they do so many different things with their identities. So it's, with saying that, it's always interesting to me when I hear Caribbean people specifically talk about the existence of trans people as if it's this like brand new concept. And I'm like, we know so many people who more than likely are identifying as transgendered, or who identify outside of the gender binary, or who are androgynous, or who are this, or who are that. Yeah. And we act like it's this new thing. And I'm like, but I've grown up seeing these people my whole life, like going to school with them, being friends with them. Like, how are we acting like this is new? But I guess that's my answer to the question. I've noticed that people use not knowing someone who is trans as an excuse for like not being educated on things. And I always try to like bring people's memory back to like, you probably have met someone who identifies as transgender. You probably have met someone who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community in a number of different identities. You just did not know because that person probably didn't share with you, or you weren't old enough to understand, or all of these things. And I see a lot of surveys and things like that, and they'll be like, oh, this percentage of Americans say that they don't know someone who is trans. And I'm like, are you positive? I don't know. But, opening up with that question. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I would say, and then it segues into the next question, I think. But what it is that so many people, the clockability, the quote unquote clockability of knowing someone was trans now these days is very minimal. It's really up to the person to disclose if they feel comfortable enough to disclose. There's been so many advances to help with gender affirming care that a lot of people sometimes don't know. Sometimes I get mistaken for cis. A couple of weeks ago, someone was like, yes, ally. And I was like, whoa, this ain't no ally. This is lived experience.
I saw that tweet and I was like, oh, Lord Jesus.
I was like, maybe I need to put that flag in my bio or something. But there's a lot of people now that are able to receive gender affirming care that sometimes you just don't know. And unless they say something, but back in the day, that care wasn't as expansive. There's histories and stories of white trans people being able to access this care, but the openness and availability and accessibility for people of color, and especially like Black trans people, is more recent. And so it's easier to be able to live what we call stealth, which is choosing not to disclose and basically going through your life as someone that doesn't share publicly that you are trans, because it is your decision to make. And so it's not as clockable as, oh, I think this feature about them, because also as the idea of femininity is very rooted in whiteness. And a lot of the times they're telling cis Black women that they are not, in fact, cis Black women because of the natural features that we have as Black people. And they don't fit into Eurocentric standards of what they deem is supposed to be femininity and beauty. So I did want to give like that credence of like, things are a bit different now. People are able to pass, not share that information until they feel comfortable, if they, or choose not to ever. Their partners may know, their family may know, but the public just may not know. But back then it was a little easier because your options most of the time were just like surgeries versus now there's the option to do hormones, and some people only do hormone therapy and gender affirming hormone therapy.
And just to be clear and to emphasize, like when a person, you know, decides to come out as trans, like they don't owe it to anyone to transition is the other part of it. I think a lot of people focus on that, like you said, clockability of like, well, you identify as trans, but you still look like X, right? And the heavy focus is like, you don't look the way that I want you to, or you don't look feminine enough, or you don't look like this. So just wanted to emphasize the fact that like for some people, the visible traits that a person has does not always connect for, you know, the gender identity. And it doesn't have to, right? Like it's not up to us to decide that someone looks good enough to identify as a woman or to identify as a man. Like, yeah, there's a lot of layers that go into this conversation, but that's the other part of what I hear people talking about is that when someone comes out as trans, they're like, oh, well, they need to go ahead and do this. And it's like,
right. And then they feel like they're entitled to share what this person needs. And it's like, why? Like this has nothing to do with
or
you.
they feel entitled to that person's transition journey when if you think like it's healthcare, that person is doing their medical, like going through their process of medical care for their body. It's still their body, like that. We don't own any of that. And whether a person chooses to share is up to them. All right. So moving on to our next question, and we've been talking about it a bit. Although it's clear that LGBTQ plus identifying members of the Black community exist and have always existed, it seems that our community is considerably behind on acceptance, on awareness, and on education on those issues. As y'all can see, for as much as Deidre and I have tried, you know, we're open, we're honest, we try to learn as much as we can, we're still behind on a lot. So what do we think is the reason for this, though? Do we think it's a Black community thing? Obviously, it's an all communities thing, but specifically talking about us, what do we think is the reason for this? And what should we be doing more of to work against it?
I think
it's definitely a thing, but I don't think it's a thing that we as Black people ever consider that we may have in some type of like box of intersection. And that's normally the reason why we're often like, oh, there's no way that I'm a bad person about this topic, but it's like not recognizing your privileges that you may be able to check, like a cis het man not understanding that in the Black community, he's up here to the rest of us. Like on
don't get me started. Don't get me started.
Because don't tell them that, because they're gonna start losing their mind.
Well, first of all, they are. The reality is when you think about the social constructs, Black men are at the top of the totem pole. Cis het Black men are at the top of the totem pole in our community because they fall closest to what white supremacy says is acceptable and gives you power. They're males. They are straight. The only thing working against them is the fact that they're Black. So in our community, they are at the top of the totem pole. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
And so, it doesn't make it okay.
It's those boxes of blinders. Like we all have some sort of privilege. Even me as a trans woman, I'm light skinned, so I benefit from the societal structures and stigmas that come with colorism. Like I'm not receiving the negativity that a dark skinned person would. I'm not receiving the negativity or the hardness. It's a lot more harder for a dark skinned trans woman to make it through this world because people already associate Blackness with more masculinity than it is femininity. they always also do this misgendering of cis women and assume that, oh, you're more rougher around the edges, or you're this and you're that because you are Black, because you are dark skinned. But I benefit from the privilege of being light skinned in the context of colorism. But I still, that doesn't, I always try to explain to people, like, just because you have that one privilege, no one is saying that you do not experience oppression in the other boxes. That, like, as a Black person, you're experiencing racism. It's an anti-Black world, no matter where you go. I learn something new every time about this world, and I'm just like, people really don't like our Black selves. Like, they don't like our asses. They don't really like us.
They hate it here. They hate us. They don't want us here.
And then my other marginalization comes from me being queer and being a trans woman. But I have the privilege of being light skinned, and being able to acknowledge and be like, okay, that doesn't mean like, oh, I'm this evil person, but it does mean that you can be conscious about the privileges that you do carry, and how can you protect those that do not carry those privileges. And I think that's our issue within the Black community. We have a really hard time owning up to the things that we are privileged with, but then also acknowledging the things that we are not. And realizing that it's we're not all free until the most marginalized of us all are free.
Yes.
And I think that's usually the biggest problem for us. Because I don't want to say that, like, it's Black, like, I really don't like the argument that, oh, it's Black people that just can't get it together. And I'm like, no. The white people I know be transphobic and racist all at once. Now, it does hurt when a Black person is also transphobic or is not welcoming of people in their spaces, because for me, I truly love being Black. I truly love everything about our culture. We're so unique. It's so regional. There's so many subcultures. Like, it's so rich in history and just power. And to feel like you're being excluded from it and being told that you're not welcome in that space as a Black person, it hurts a little bit more when it's coming from your own people.
Absolutely.
That's the nuance there, that we understand that there's a world of transphobic people. It don't matter what race they are, but it hurts a little bit more when it's coming from intracommunal, when it's coming from within. And I think that's usually the problem, because us as Black people, we are oppressed broadly, but then within our community, communally, some of us carry more privileges than others do, whether it's class, whether it's color, whether it's, you know, being cis versus trans, whether it's being straight versus queer. You know, I always think of that game where they're like, walk forward if you have had since you were a kid, walk forward if you come from a 2-parent household. And then we just all see how staggered everything is. Like, you're thinking we're all peers and everything's equal, everything's equitable, but everybody's coming from a different leg up. Everybody's coming from a different crutch in society and in life. And so I always think of it that way. And I always operate in this thing of giving grace. I give so much grace to like us as Black people, as a community, one, education wise, and just the literature and the verbiage we just never had access to all the time. Because of the oppression that we face. Like, people just want to keep us down. And so I'm very like, okay, it's going to take a little bit of more time. And that's understandable. And I can always tell when someone is intentionally trying to grow and be better versus someone that's willing to just live in their ignorance and is just choosing to be a bigot and just hateful. And it's something that you kind of get really good at. And I feel like Black women get good at it in general, cis or trans, where you can really tell when someone's alienating you versus someone is really just ignorant about a topic and just want to get clarity from you, and they just made a mistake.
I definitely agree with that. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of just like, I think the reason why we tend to pinpoint the Black community when it comes to bigotry is because it hurts. It is painful. I think especially for me, and what inspired like a lot of my notes on this episode is that I was seeing Black women specifically spouting bigotry online. And I'm like, of all people.
I was shocked. Some were following me and I was like, girl,
what is happening?
This was a sisterhood. I was so confused.
Yeah.
And you guys are making a valid point, because this was my first introduction to, like, and hey, as I referenced it earlier, is we grew up around people who would be tolerant of queer people until those queer people were not in the room. And then they would talk their shit. And so as a child, especially once I was old enough to understand like race and everything, I found myself being like, but there are people at the end of the day. These are our people. So if we can't accept them, who will? That's always been my attitude. Like, if we can't accept our own people, who's gonna take care of them? Who's gonna protect them? And it really confuses me how of anybody in our community, Black women, could be so hateful toward, especially trans women. And that's not saying all Black women, but unfortunately, an alarming amount of Black women are extremely bigoted towards not even just trans women, but just gay men, everybody in the community. And I'm just like, bro.
Yeah, and it's frustrating, because when I think about misogynoir, I'm like, so intimately, one, how intersectionality works because you experience it. And you know what it's like for people within your own community to treat you as subhuman, even though they are a part of your own community. We experience it from the Black men who choose to be big. Like, we experience that. So for us to experience it and then get online and be like, oh, well, I'm not comfortable with this thing, so I'm going to speak out against it. And you don't clock how it sounds coming out of your own mouth, but you're able to clock it coming from a Black man's or from a white person's mouth. And it's like, and that's why, how does that not click to you?
Yeah. And that's why earlier I said privilege is the number one thing, because what I hear from a lot of these Black women who are so hateful toward trans women is their fear of losing what little privilege they have, because the one privilege they have over trans women is the fact that they're cis, or because they don't even want to be called cis, honey. They're so offended by being referred to as cis women. I'm like, babe, like,
girl, by a prefix, like, but please relax.
Like, yo, I came across a video that one of these theme pages had reshared of some Black girl trying to explain what Just Hilarious was saying and doing it poorly. And again, I'm like, you're just defending bigotry. There's nothing to defend here. She's wrong. She's just wrong. So instead of going back and forth, I simply commented like, trans women, I don't remember exactly what I said, but the sentiment of my comment was simply, trans women existence does not take away from my womanhood. I am no less of a woman because a trans woman exists. We are both women. Like, that was just my sentiment. We're all women at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But one woman literally responded and was like, their womanhood will replace yours. It's fear. It's fear. And it's this idea that they're somehow going to lose their spot in the world because trans women exist. And I'm like, that's literally not how this works.
And it's also regurgitating white supremacist talking points. And people don't realize that. Like, do you not hear how you, like, I just don't understand how it never...
Our jobs rhetoric, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
and I'm like, you over here,
they took our jobs, they're gonna take our women, they're gonna destroy our homes and our communities. Like,
but what's sending me is y'all are gatekeeping periods. And it's like, nobody is trans because they want a period, babe. Like, nobody, like, what is going on? Like,
which we will get to the Just Hilarious conversation. I'm saving that for the end just because there's so much to unpack.
So wild
there. But before we get there, I did want to ask Daric a couple more questions. So you know are pretty public and talking about, you know, the experiences of transition. So how would you describe the emotions behind transition and the adjustment that comes with it? Just, you know, self-consciously, for your body, for your family and friends. I know because I follow you on Twitter, you know, you've been pretty open about it, but I would like for you, you know, as much as you're comfortable, to share about that experience, because again, I think people don't know and don't understand, and I want to give them the opportunity to learn.
So before we even get into the medical side that affects my emotions and hormones and everything like that, first off, transitioning is such a personal choice. There's so much that went through my mind before even wanting to express it. I think I lived out as non-binary for a year before I officially just told people that I am officially like a trans woman. And a huge part of that was more so being scared. My family was always weird about me being queer because I've been out as queer in general, some type of label since I was 17, and I'm 27 now, so over a decade. Just always known that I just was not a cishet person. Um, and it was it's a lot of like thinking and self-exploring and understanding because I am okay with they them pronouns. I am. I can kind of tell when someone's just choosing not to say she her with me though. Um, you know, but and it had to like you sit with yourself and you understand like what genuinely causes your dysphoria, what does not cause it, what makes you feel comfortable in the body that you're in. And those are a lot of the like pre-notions and emotions that you really have to work through before even considering the transition or considering like letting it out into the world. And I think the only reason why I even had to be so public about me transitioning was because I already was in a public facing space. A close friend of mine is always talking about how I'm currently going through a lot because I'm transitioning on the job. I'm a journalist that's worked at the LA Times. I've worked at Spotify and a few different other places, and you can find me online. You can Google me. I have a knowledge panel box and everything. I'm right there. There's no escaping the past, old photos or anything like that. And then, as Hayeza said, we both went to undergrad together. I was like a student leader on that campus. I did a lot of different things that was very public facing. And now working in media, being so public facing, it's so much like you kind of have to get ahead of it before others choose what the narrative is. And I've always kind of felt that way. I feel that way about my own HIV status and just even with my transness. It's me wanting to control my own narrative and not allowing anyone else to manipulate the story. And that's my choice to disclose those things while others may just choose not to. And I am very aware of the privileges that I have within doing so, but it's been hard. It's been really, really hard getting folks to probably say the right pronouns at work, in the newsrooms and stuff like that. Making sure when I'm working with different editors that I'm freelancing for, they're getting things correct and right. And it's a little bit layered. But it's a little heavier emotions. Now that I'm currently on gender affirming hormone therapy, so GAHT, or as commonly known as HRT. And my body is estrogen dominant and very minimal, basically can't find the testosterone at all. And so with the estrogen, I can tap into my emotions a lot more because I'm not blocking it the way that I was when my body was testosterone dominant. So I find myself crying a lot. Like if something really did affect or hurt me, it's easier for me to kind of express that emotion. But it is also scary at the same time because these are your first times really experiencing such heavy emotions. And so you're going through these things. Like I experienced some like really disappointment for the first time, and I was like, hurt me, and I don't know. Like normally I'll just be like, it is what it is, but I was like, that really, really hurt me. Like, why did it hurt me so bad? And I was just crying. And it's learning that, you know, when you start the medical process of your transition to that, your emotions, the way you feel are going to change, especially with hormones. I tweeted this out on my Twitter explaining to people that we experience all the hormonal symptoms that estrogen does to your body. Had one ignorant person, shout out to Hayes over pinpointing that the whole thread wasn't being able to be seen. But I had an ignorant person that was like, so what that mean? Like, y'all just don't bleed, y'all just don't do this and that. And I was like, so in the way they were correct, I do not have a uterus, so I do not shed the uterine lining every single month. I don't do that. However, there is like a hormonal cycle that a trans woman can experience based on the hormones, where it's like the estrogen is kicking a little bit heavier in a certain time of the month. And we're like bloating, we're getting like the ghost cramps and stuff on our sides. And you're also just experiencing a lot of like high intense emotions. And it's a little hard to pinpoint when those times are because we do not menstruate. And so it's like really hard to track them, but I can normally tell I'm usually like craving some like mustard or some like pickle or something. I like a random craving. Like I'm vegan, I've been vegetarian, but like I started craving chicken recently, like real chicken, since I've been on HRT. And it's
Now
usually
your
around
body trying to betray you.
Right.
and it's usually like around a very like I can taste it. I'm like, wow, I would love some KFC right now. And I can literally pinpoint those things where I'm like, well, that's odd and different. I'm not feeling this way any other time throughout the month, but it's through this exact time. And I'm often like chained to my heating pad because I literally cannot do anything unless I'm like near it. And trying to explain it to people, there's not much conversation around it, but you can go back years of like how there's non-menstruational with PMSing for trans women. There's medical journals and studies on it. But there's so much fear of, oh, you're saying you can get a period. No, I don't call it that. I call it my hormonal cycle because it's sometimes where I'm literally just like the estrogen is just estrogening.
Yeah.
And I can't go on. And so it's that emotional state too of feeling like you can't really discuss these things that you're dealing with either because you don't want to offend anyone. You don't want anyone to misunderstand. But it's not a lot of resources for us girls. I see girls, like it's just not. I've realized that more since I've like started my medical transition because even when I was out as non-binary last year, I was always really leaning more towards femme and I was already kind of socially transitioning. But the medical transition started for me. I just hit 5 months. And so it's very hard. You feel really alone, because you're not really sure who you can talk to. And then like there's not a lot of resources really there to discuss the ways that you're feeling or the symptoms that come with HRT, which is a lot of the hormonal symptoms and finding out that I'll experience menopause when I get a certain age as well. That always shocks people. And I'm like, yes, because we experience the hormonal side of PMSing when we are younger. When we get a little older, we do experience menopause. And then we also then start adding testosterone into our regimen because that helps with menopause symptoms. And so finding that all out from my doctor recently and then just being like, I ain't got nobody to talk about like this with this with. I have my like cis home girls and they're always trying to be there and understanding. And I appreciate them so much because they've been great. Like the Black women in my life have been really amazing about extending sisterhood to me. And it's what we call a second puberty. So imagine when we were going through puberty.
You know what? I'm so sorry to cut you off, but I'm like, this sounds like being a teenage girl because I'm like, the only people who can relate to you aside from other trans women are like young girls who are just starting puberty.
Like someone had to tell me about like the lettuce trick for when your boobs are swollen because one day they were just bad. And I was like, what am I supposed to do about this? And I often am like, we call it, it's always called like in colloquially and even in medical, it's like it's your second puberty because you're going through exactly what your body would have went through if you went through puberty with estrogen dominant puberty. It's the same alternate if you were transitioning from AFAB, assigned female at birth, and you were becoming a trans man. You're now experiencing like testosterone and pimples and everything because your skin is totally changing from the hormone. And it's very much like another puberty. And that's the emotional part because we all remember when we were going through puberty and that was just not a great time.
Yeah.
So many things were happening and you were so confused and so many things that you just still needed to figure out, but always didn't have the answers. And so I often say that like I'm experiencing my womanhood, but I'm also experiencing my blossoming, my girlhood all at the same time. And that's such a heavy emotion and just experience all at once. So it's pretty, it can be isolating emotionally. It can be beautiful at times. I'm journaling more. I have a diary.
Yes, for the diary.
Yeah, you better.
I jot down how I'm feeling. And that really helps me process the things and be honest about what I'm feeling in those moments. But it definitely can be isolating, but it also can be a beautiful thing because sometimes I'm like, wow, I'm honest about myself about some emotions that I never really would have been honest about. And it's easier to do that now. And so the emotional toll is as heavy as the physical one. Because you are essentially one day you can wake up and you're just feeling great in your skin once you started like a medical transition, and you're just like, oh wow, I feel amazing. Bones is moaning. That's what the girls call them colloquially. Um, and the other days you're feeling dysphoric and you're maybe spending an entire week of not looking in the mirror. Um, and I've experienced those in the 5 months that I've been on HRT, and it's a lot. And sometimes you don't want it to be like your full identity, in a sense of like it's the only thing you're talking about when you're talking to people. And if you're already like someone like me, I grew up not really ever wanting to be like a burden on people. And like I kind of was, I'm a Capricorn, so I'm very like, do it myself if anybody, you know. And so sometimes it's just really hard. I'll look at my phone and like, who can I call and talk to about this stuff? Because also without being bombarded with a bunch of questions that then deter from why I'm calling, like I just need some support right now.
Right. And it turns from you needing support to you having to educate somebody on something. That sounds exhausting.
Like sometimes I just want to eat some chocolate and I just want to tell you, girl, it's been a bad day. My boobs were hurting and I was bloating and I was cramping and I don't feel great and I hate it today and it was a really bad day and I couldn't express it to anybody. I had a 1 hour long meeting and I wanted to go lay down right afterwards. Like sometimes it's just that, and then it's sometimes just needing just that ear of someone. It gets isolating when you realize that you may not always have that, because the support that you need while you're transitioning really shows up in a different way. It's so many different types of ways that you need support.
Yeah. So has it been difficult since transitioning, finding that network of other trans women to speak to learn from, or is it sort of that similar conundrum of you're trying to become educated on sort of what you're going through, but you don't want them to feel that burden of having to now educate you, or like, how has that experience been?
It's kind of a bit of both. I am what the girls would call a baby trans. And I have people that are older than me, older trans Black women that I do know that also work in media, that I'm really close to. But I just see them as my older sisters. It's kind of like when you're the younger sibling, you got your questions, but you also know you don't want to be the annoying younger sibling. And so they help out with whatever. They might see me struggling with something or wondering about something, and then they just come with the advice without me even having to ask. Other times I do ask, but I don't always immediately ask because I have my own notion of just not ever really wanting to burden anyone or just, bother in a sense of like, why am I adding to what they got going on? But and that's just a me thing. But I do have like resources of people that do help out, that tell me, like when I was trying to figure out how to tell my parents and stuff, because for me, I knew the lie. My parents are really weird about lying. I feel like Caribbean parents are the same. Like, it's not even the fact of what you did. It's like, you lied to me. The lie is worse than and so, right. And so, they helped me figure out how to tell my parents. And one of the Black trans women that I know, shared with me that she did like a letter. And so I shared mine as a text message, like a long letter format text message with my mom. And I did not call her. I knew not to do it on the phone. I was like, I know my mother. I'm gonna here. I said, so process that. Like, it was basically like process that, and then we can talk. But either way, like there's no stopping this. Like I've made a decision really like a year ago that this was happening.
Like, I'm informing you. I'm not asking you.
I'm just informing. Hello. I delayed for like 3 months because I actually got the go from my doctors to start at HRT in January, like right around when I turned 27 after my birthday. And I did not start until the end of March because I had not told my parents, and I could not work up the courage to tell them. Just coming from a Southern Baptist household in the South. And it took time because my mom slowly got better. Like, my mom's pretty progressive for a Black Southern mom. While we are not as traditional anymore, my mom doesn't go to church every single Sunday, but she's very like rooted in the word and like prayer and stuff like any other Black Southern mom. And so it was just this hesitancy to like tell them, which delayed really, really delayed me from getting started. Because that's 3 month difference. In 3 months, the first 3 months, there are key markers in your medical transition with the HRT. And 3 months is a huge part. That's when you first start seeing some first noticeable changes. And I'm already delayed like 3 months of when they told me I could start, because I haven't figured out so when to tell my parents, like I would have been 8 months right now instead of 5. And I often think about that, because I call this journey the journey to Yiddies. And so I'm always like, I could have had a whole extra other 3 months of Yiddies right now of growth. And I'm so annoyed that I do not because of that. But I knew I needed to tell them first, instead of just randomly popping up with some Yiddies somewhere, and they're just like,
what's going on? Yeah.
And I think you needed the peace of mind, I guess, to like start your transition without that anxiety of I'm doing this in secret, and like the people that I care about the most don't know. Because it's hard to hide things. Yeah.
I think people, my closest friends from college, they're like, I'm so happy that you're able to live in your truth now.
Yeah.
I think so many people were aware and knew. But for me, for the longest, I just didn't have verbiage. I didn't have terms to really describe what I was feeling.
Yeah.
But it was also a safety thing. Because I love our HBCU. I really do. But I had moments where I experienced some things that just made me be like, okay, protection first.
Yeah.
And
our campus was not, as much as I love it, was not the safest place for people within the LGBTQ plus community. It just wasn't. And many HBCU campuses aren't.
Because the B stands for Baptist most of the time on the HBCU.
The B does stand for Baptist.
We all have to come on now.
No, that ass.
It does.
Anything royal court, we was having to go to the chapel for meetings and to meet with our advisors. That's how
we have a chapel on campus. There's services every Sunday. Like, and it's so interesting because like our HBCU is like progressive in all these other ways. Like our chapel was all faiths, right? It wasn't just a Baptist chapel or like we were progressive on all these other fronts, right? But the minute it came to like student groups for the LGBTQ plus community, or the possibility of one of our student leaders identifying as gay or trans, or all of a sudden you saw that
out-facing person when I was there. Like I was SGA, I was editor-in-chief of our newspaper, campus activities board, PALS, all these other student organizations, and people knew I was like, I am out, I am queer. I do same gender loving, all of that. Like that was, but however, I'm also a smart individual. I have these aspirations and goals.
Exactly.
And that, even not really fully living in my full self at the time, was still jarring for a lot of people. And I assimilated a lot. I assimilated a lot. I hated it, but I assimilated quite a bit. And that led to some really like terrible things. And that helped me for a really long time. And that really also influenced, like, I work in media. I initially was doing broadcast and on-camera work stuff. And so I'm just like, I don't think I can be my full self if I want to have a successful career. Especially if I'm already seeing how that plays into how I'm accepted here within the collegiate space.
Yeah.
And especially knowing me, like, I'm so proud of my Blackness and stuff. And like, I knew that if I worked anywhere, I'm covering Black communities, I wanted to be able to work with other Black people, even working like Black spaces and Black companies and newsrooms. And so it really influenced, it delayed the coming out as trans so many, like there were so many milestones that just made me so hesitant.
And that's so unfair to think about.
It's like, really unfair, because what I'm hearing is like, you still care so deeply for a community that you, one, are a part of, but continuously rejects you and mistreats you. And I'm just like,
despite how much you've done for it,
how much you continue to do for this community. Like,
I love them. I love them. I love us so much. Like it's so hard to put into words how much I love us as a people. It's so hard because it's so infinite. I give us so much grace. And understanding that we didn't always have access to the language and terminology of things and like intertextuality of it all, and unlearning. To me, breaking generational curses when it comes to us as Black people is really unlearning the bigoted ways and the religion and the chains that really held on us, and like the way that we would think about things in the world.
Yeah.
That's really what like breaking generational curses means to me for us as a people.
Yeah.
Not the capitalistic, oh, we got to get rich, like girl,
right.
Like I'm so much less interested in seeing us buy into like the capitalist system as I am seeing us break free from like the white supremacist BS that like we tend to buy into, which bigotry, like the misogynoir, all of this stuff comes from that, and it doesn't click for people. And I'm like, y'all are so focused on getting rich and getting your second stream of income, but your kids are terrified of you.
Seventh stream of income.
Right, like your kids are terrified of you, and there's family members you have who you're alienating with your little Facebook conversations and like all these other things. And it's like the type of freedom that I want for our community has nothing to do with us getting rich. Like it's
so
nothing.
You know what, I'm glad you, because I want to ask a question about, I guess, allyship, because I find that when there's people in my life, especially like relatives who are ignorant, the approach I tend to take is, if I find that this person doesn't seem to have an interest in learning more, I don't even bother in trying to. Okay.
I do not.
And that's what I was going to ask. Am I a terrible ally for not, you know, like, because if it's one thing, if it's somebody.
So I feel like this. Sometimes, so I'm a journalist, but I'm also an academic. So a lot of the times I'm in both spaces.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just want to exist.
Yeah.
And I don't want every single moment of having to be like, well, as a trans woman, this is what I experienced.
Right.
The verbatim, like Google is free. Like,
right.
But I think when it comes to allyship in the sense of what you're talking about, like, I want to say that I'm saying that to preface that, like, I understand where it's just like, wow, I gotta constantly educate y'all. Like, I shouldn't, no person really should have to. If someone is really in trying to like get better about something and grow as a person, they're gonna do the work themselves as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, you know, you can have somebody lead you to the pond, but you can't get them to drink it. They're gonna have to drink it themselves.
Yeah.
And so they have initial things in like understanding and terminology. They may not have it all right. That's why I give so much grace, because I'm still learning things as a trans woman. Because I never really had the chance to explore my womanhood or my girlhood.
Right.
All happening at once, which creates a whole other bag of issues dealing with. But I also will say on the other hand, so recently this week I was misgendered several times. I did not have the energy to really like correct anyone. I just cringed at each time that they did, and I just kind of ignored them. And a friend had to step in and be the one to say, well, no, and I was like, I let it, girl.
Right.
Period.
Like, that's the allyship that matters. And making sure that like a person that is more marginalized doesn't always have to do this heavy lifting to defend their identity. But also, if you know this person is just trying to pick an argument with you, I give the grace of like, I say it all the time. I say bigot and idiot rhyme with each other for a reason. And I just don't even want to like stoke the fans of like hate. And if I just know this person is just gonna just be a hateful person and they're not going to really be educated, then I totally understand of just like not really giving the time of day to them, because you already know how the conversation is going to go and won't actually receive it. They're going to try to, if anything, change your view on it and try to make it on their side and be against the thing that they are bigoted towards. And it's like, I'm not engaging. I understand when folks don't. I totally, but then the other hand side of like, It just really depends on the scenario. I think it's because sometimes the best allyship that you can have is when the person is not in the room. Think of it in the sense of when you have a white mutual and they're like, they come from a conservative family and it's just something that is the way that it is. And like they got a racist, but they don't really hold that grandpa accountable in any type of Thanksgiving dinners. They kind of just let them be a bigot. Us as Black people, we're often like, so what? Why are you still cherishing that relationship? But we get that that's your blood and everything, but you still have, if you're claiming to be an ally, you do have a right to tell them, you're wrong. I'm not going to engage in this conversation, but I just need you to know that you are wrong. And that's all I have to say to you. And saying something is better than nothing, because sometimes when someone's not getting checked or told that what they're doing is wrong, they tend to just, well, ain't nobody ever said anything. This is how we get the conversation of like, trans is brand new. Or even on the Black side of when it comes to like the word of the, like people saying the N-word that are not Black. For the longest, people were giving people passes in like the 90s, early 2000s era. And so people are like, well, it's in the hip hop songs, it's in this, it's in that. We should be able to say it. We're non-Black, Latino, and we can say it. And it's like, no, you cannot be just because a time where we were ignorant and not really aware of the harm that it caused. Does not mean that it was okay and that, all of a sudden now it's not okay. No, we're just educated on something and we now re-looked at it and we're like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. None of you should be doing that. And I see that I always tell people as an example of kind of seeing it of like, it's how bigotry works in general. Like allow it to just fester, it does. And so I just would recommend maybe in that instance, because I also, it depends. Like I got some aunties that I just can't.
At the very least, they're going to get out of me, that's not okay to say. Like, that's not how this works. And I leave it at that. That's literally not how that works. That's my favorite thing to say to people.
That's what I recommend. I recommend being able to do a sentence of like, letting them know that like, I don't
agree. Oh yeah. So I make it clear that.
And I'm not having this conversation with you because you're not going to receive the information. And left at that. And I think that's always better than just like, sitting there in silence and allowing them to go on,
Oh, no. I never sit in silence.
That's why I compare it to like the white mutuals that are like, well,
my grandpa's racist.
So two things. One, I never sit in silence. At the very least, my family who has said out-of-pocket things, they know I don't agree. They know for a fact, Deidre does not agree with this fuck shit. So, and I just don't engage. I'm like, that's not how that works. And I just move on. So there's and also I don't cherish relationships with people who are that out of pocket. Like my own mother and we had a huge falling out years ago. And this was before I went no contact with her because I spent my whole life not realizing that my mother was homophobic. I knew she was ignorant, but I didn't realize she was homophobic. And it broke my heart. Like I remember being curled up on the floor, crying my eyes out. And even one of my friends who couldn't quite understand was like, why are you so affected by this? And I was like, imagine if you as a Black person had a white friend who your entire life brought you over to their home, hung out with you, their parents fed you dinner, and then as a grown adult, you found out that their parents were racist as fuck. How would you feel? And she was like, fuck. I'm like, that's how my gay friends feel right now. And I learned how homophobic my mother was because the first Pride parade that ever happened on the island that we're from, my twin sister was at this parade and my mom was one of the protesters who was upset that this parade was happening. That's how I learned how homophobic my mother is. I spent my whole life bringing my queer friends home. I thought that my home was a safe space for my queer friends. My whole life. My mom always let me bring my queer friends around. And she's never said anything rude to them or anything. She never told me I couldn't. She created, or at least it seemed like it was a safe space. And then here she is at this fucking parade as a protester speaking like against this parade. And I just remember being devastated. And we had a huge falling out behind it because I'm like, dude, you just created, like, you just betrayed all my friends. You just betrayed me. I would have rather you be homophobic with your fucking chest and I had not exposed my friends to you. But imagine, like, if I was that heartbroken, imagine all my friends who I brought around over the years. They must have felt so fucking crushed.
Because
and I'm like,
complicit without your consent to be complicit. You were unaware that you were bringing people that you really cared about into an unsafe space.
yeah.
And as a child, that's unfair to you. And that's what I always like. Us as kids, we just don't have any autonomy to like make decisions. We don't have any autonomy to like be like, no, I won't stand for this. It's very much do as I say, not as I do. Like it sucks and it hurts because you're just like, this person I really, really care about, I put them in harm's way and I had no idea.
And I had no idea. That was the most heartbreaking part, is because again, if I knew my mom was like that, I would never have brought my friend.
It would be like, no, girl, let's go over your
Let's go to your home. Let's go someplace else, baby girl.
Let's wait till she's not home.
She's not home.
It's so devastating to, like, over the years, you know, as we grow, as we educate ourselves, as we expose ourselves to certain things, to then go back home or interact with our family and realize like just how far we are on like that spectrum of like understanding and tolerance and all of this stuff and acceptance. And again, it's also interesting and thinking about what we were talking about earlier, how people back home will supposedly be so accepting of the queer community until it's too much for them, until it's too in their face, until it's until whatever line of their respectability or discomfort is crossed. And all of a sudden the bigot will like jump out. And that's really why I was like, no, we're having this conversation this season. We're doing this episode this season because I keep seeing more and more people. And I don't know if it's just the prominence of all of these anti-trans bills and laws that are being passed, or just like how much bigger the conversation is becoming. I don't know what's pushing it, but it almost feels like people who I've interacted on social media with before are showing sides of themselves that I'm like, oh, I did not clock you as a bigot, but apparently you are. And it's mind-blowing. So, you know, we can wrap up with this conversation, you know, briefly touching on this whole Just Hilarious situation, but this, at least recently, is really bringing those people to the forefront of like the minute that Just Hilarious conversation and that video came out, all of a sudden you're seeing these Black women who supposedly are allies, who supposedly are comfortable with the LGBTQ plus community. Now you draw the line at trans women, and it's like, that is an interesting line to draw. Yeah. So I guess my biggest question, because I personally, I don't feel like we need to go into the details or I don't need to argue why the term cisgendered is actually not that serious. Like
we can just say it's a prefix that's literally existed since ancient Rome, and trans have existed since then. The two terms are taught in organic chemistry. They've literally just been around forever. It's a Latin term, and it is what it is. It goes back to ignorance. It goes back to if you just didn't know, you didn't know, which is cool. But you cannot say, oh, some don't exist, and then find out that it's literally thousands of years old and be like, it came out of nowhere. No,
it didn't, babe.
You are more aware of it now.
Yep. And I'm seeing people using it as like, oh, I don't want to be called this. If I have to respect your pronouns and your gender identity, then you shouldn't be able to call me this. And I'm like, again, y'all are using white supremacist talking points to use against trans people, and you don't even realize it, because white people don't like to be called like Caucasian and They're
like, oh, like white. They don't even like white. They don't even
like white.
I'm like, why you get to be a person and we got to be Black people?
Hello.
Like, everybody else got to be something abbreviation people, but you want to just be a person.
Yeah, I call them European American to be
European American. But those same talking points I've been seeing all over the internet, right? Of the why this has us all up in arms and we're being replaced and and I'm just like, where the hell is it? I'm not going to act blindsided. It's been in existence forever. If you're a bigot now, you were a bigot 5 years ago. I don't know where it came from or how you decided to let it out. But I guess I'm just mind blown by like the fact that it's so simple to me in my head. Like nothing about trans women existing or trans women talking about womanhood
makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Nothing about it makes me feel like I'm gonna just disappear one day because trans women exist.
Right.
So I'm not understanding where that disconnect is coming
There's
in.
an irony there. There's such an irony there, because some of the same Black women that I know that are at the forefront of how fragile masculinity does not really like exist, like no one can like take away from a cis man's masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Their understanding of that. But then when it comes to their own womanhood and femininity, they feel that someone can take away from it. Another, like a trans woman can take away from it. And I'm like, when it's the conversation that a gay man or a man that is not subscribing to what's deemed as masculine is emasculating a whole community of Black men, are like, nope, that's not what's happening, but you can't seem to understand it for yourself. And so I've seen that with a few people in some of my own mutuals where I'm like, oh, we are not mutuals. You was just cool with moi, but you do not like what I am and who I am.
I want to ask you guys, this is kind of, I know I'm reaching here, but I feel like this is a factor. I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, just tell me I'm wrong. Do you guys think that part of the disdain that these women have for trans women specifically is their fear of losing access to men? The reason why I ask that is because you mentioned earlier that back in the day, it was easier to clock a trans woman. In this day and age, it's harder. Do you think that there's a part of, and again, if it's a reach, it's a reach. But I feel like the women who are...
I don't think it's a reach. I want to say I think it's a reach. I do think it's a nuanced conversation.
Okay.
I think it's really nuanced because I don't... Look,
the reason, and I'm gonna say it because I'm a straight woman.
Don't got no
I'm a cishet woman.
I don't believe in the whole competition between.
Because here's the thing.
I feel like it's a competition.
Yeah, I don't think there's a competition between trans women and cis women. I think that whole thing is so wild and just dumb. But the women that I notice are most vocal and most confident in their education, honey, surrounding trans women seem to be the women who are very male identified. And even like these content creators and just these people who are speaking very loudly and ignorantly online seem to be people who always have content surrounding relationships and things such as that. And I find myself wondering, is this you somehow feeling threatened? Like your womanhood cannot be taken away. It just cannot. Your womanhood cannot be taken away. However, if you're afraid that somehow you're going to lose access to the men that you want, maybe that's really what's going on here. Maybe you somehow feel like trans women are now, because it's going back to the bigots, right? Oh, the Mexicans are taking all the jobs. You don't want the job. Like what are you doing?
It's a very layered conversation because trans women, we deal with it on the side of some cis gay men don't like us and feel that same way. There are a handful of cis women that do feel that way. It's this, for the gays, it's this competition of, oh, the DL trade are going to go for us because we're more femme. We're more closer to the women that they typically date. And for women, it's often, they lean into the guy is gay. To be clear, any man that I'm dating, I still date queer men. Like I date bisexual, pansexual. Some gay men are very open to still dating with me. All that. But as of recently, like since I've been out, I've only dated straight men, a lot of cishet men, and they are straight. But then there comes this conversation of defense, and it's kind of giving credence to what you're talking about in this way of like trying to still feel valid in the sense of like, oh, he didn't go for me because he's gay. Like you have to come up with some type of
right,
like some type of reason to justify the reason why this man was not interested in you and a trans woman. And then there's always this thing of like, oh, it's because y'all get surgeries, y'all get this. Natural. But and it's like if you didn't have all of that, and it's like the cis girls get the BBLs too. So like what are we doing here?
Okay, because you don't see me over here mad at the cis girl at the girls who are getting BBLs. I'm like, I was.
Well, and sometimes there's a handful. That same little, it's like a Venn diagram. It's like
that's true. The natural body girl.
They're anti the IG model, and they're the ones that are always like, what would you be able to do without that booty? Those type of girls are the same
true
girls that are like, transphobic to trans women. Like that's why I like, try to show people like it's so interconnected. Like these people, the just hilarious of it all, for example,
fucking hate
people
her.
were pulling up other moments where she just was a terrible person, just being bigoted, being rude to other communities, and everyone's just like, just always been a bad person. Like this situation now, but literally has like said things about survivors of assault, has literally like tried to get a man that was sick off of like SIKH. He was sick, being very Islamophobic and like Islamic. Like it was a
implied
whole
he was a
thing.
terrorist.
Yeah, and it was a whole thing, and I'm just like, platforming people that way that just show their nasty side to these different, like every single possible community that they can think of. They're not a good person, and they're not someone that you should want to align with, because as soon as you do something that they don't like, they're gonna turn on you too.
Yep.
I think that's what so many of us as trans people and queer people in general, we are always trying to get that across to people. I think also a lot of cis Black women are trying to get that across to people. They try to get it across most in part to like their male counterparts a lot, understanding that like you are still Black, them people will still treat you like you are a Black person, and so you're trying to think like all these things are okay, but they're gonna still remind you that you are Black. Like they're going to be oppressive towards you the same way that they are oppressive towards us. And so I try not to give this like, it's so hard. It's like what you mentioned is very real. I want to say that first, that it is very real. There are some women that do feel that way, like it's a competition. They feel like, oh, the guy that I was dealing with is gay because he's now with a trans woman. Even though all this man would literally never, ever, ever get with a man. Like they literally only are attracted to femininity, womanhood, and that's it. Like if you're not giving it, they're not attracted. But it's this number to feel like that's why I wasn't enough for him, or that's why. And it's something that we just do a lot as humans in general, of just feeling like it didn't be me, then it must have been this other reason why I couldn't. And it sucks, but I try not to lean too much into the competition because I'm such a, I like see the big picture. While that portion of it is true, when we acknowledge it, sadly, is this weird thing of like if you lose either way. Like by acknowledging the conversation as a trans woman, pull this part of the conversation of me just saying
and try to villainize you.
Like, oh, they were saying that, you know, that we get jealous of them and this and that. I'm like,
I know,
girl, ain't nobody saying it. I don't think even my sisters in transness, no one is a competition for Daric. I think there's space for everybody. And I believe that in like wholeheartedly in every aspect of life. And so I try not to give into it, but I know that there are people that operate in competition. There are people that feel like, oh, you're taking a spot from me. And I understand that that's very much a reality. And so that's when I'm saying like, yes, that does exist. But it's such a nuanced conversation because
absolutely,
when you like give it breath.
I know. You know, can I just say, I'm sitting here and I find that, and maybe I need to call my therapist, right? I think I'm just naturally a very unforgiving person because most recent like year, I've stopped saying that I'm pro-Black and I simply say I am pro-Black woman. I am pro-Black people who give a fuck about the entire community. Like if your pro-Blackness excludes queer Black people, I'm not pro you. Like you don't get to.
They aren't pro-Black.
Exactly.
You're not pro-Black if you are against the liberation of all Black people.
Exactly. And I just have a hard time.
I say that, and you can do whatever you want. I don't like to change people's do what for you. But I found myself trying to do that too, and I'm like, why am I changing my whole juxtaposition about pro-Blackness when in reality these people that are claiming to be pro-Black are just simply not, because they are not including all Black people. And so you are pro-Black. It just turns out they are not.
And you're right, they're not pro-Black. But what irritates me is the least pro-Black people tend to benefit the most from our pro-Blackness. And that's why I'm so upset.
The platform for our people and the voice
because I'm just like, they wouldn't piss on you. They wouldn't piss on gay Black people if they were on fire. But those very Black people that they themselves are marginalized or trying to marginalize are the people who are keeping them alive, who are defending them, who are ready to fight on their behalf. And so I'm just like, yeah, fuck them. Like, I'd rather, listen, I am one of those people who believes where attention goes, energy flows. I would rather my energy and my attention go to the people who actually deserve it than the people who are keeping white supremacy up and alive, because there are plenty of Black people who are contributing to keeping white supremacy alive. And I just don't want to, I don't have it for them. Like, I remember this was maybe back in 2016. And that's why I have I'm always like unaware of how many bigots are like among us, because back in like 2016, if somebody even posted something that was like transphobic, homophobic in any way, I would just immediately unfriend them. So now, like, when this Just Hilarious thing is coming up, I'm not seeing the people on my timeline because I removed them a long time ago.
Girl, you know what I did?
And that's the thing. I might log on tonight and have to. Right.
I did. I was very shocked to see people. They didn't see nothing wrong with still following me and saying this stuff. And I'm just like,
fucking wild. And me, I might log on tonight and have to unfriend people because I don't go through my friends list. I go based on what comes up on my timeline. So if some wild shit comes up on my timeline, I'm just unfriending you and moving on.
There were people I saw who they want to try to seem supportive of the trans community while getting away with bigoted talking points, right? And they want to say, I'm uneducated on this, or I just don't understand this, but they're still pushing like bigoted. And that's a lot of what I saw. It was
conditional allyship. It's
conditional. Yeah, conditional. It was, I support trans people, but I see what Just Hilarious was saying. And I'm sorry, if you listen to that video, how can you see what she was saying when she was being so bigoted? Like,
so bigoted.
And the issue is, and like, apparently the clip that she shared in her video wasn't even the full video. And the entire discussion was that like cis women are not the ones that own periods, because there are people that are not women that do still have uterus. And the whole conversation around the medical side of things, it's not even for us as trans women. Like, we are all very clear that we experience hormonal things, like hormonal cycle stuff because of estrogen, but we do not have a uterus. We don't actually menstruate. We experience like symptoms of PMS, but that's it. Like all the things that the hormone causes your body to do. That, but we don't got a uterus for anything to shed the uterine lining or menstruate. We don't have that.
Right.
Terminology is for non-binary and trans men who were born with uteruses and still have them and still experience periods. And it's for them to not be misgendered when they're getting healthcare.
Yes.
Them to not feel like their identity does not matter when they're trying to get healthcare and get access to the care for people that do have periods. And people just it's ignorance and bigotry that just really conflates these things. And there's always this discussion too about like trans kids and like, you know, you're mutilating them and this, and I'm like, why are you why are you thinking about a child's like genital area? Also, it's rare. You can't just, there's so many steps to get gender affirming care. Most people have to do a mental health evaluation and screening before they can even get access to care. When you're under the age of 18, typically surgery is not possible. It's very, very rare. You got to get like parental consent, like all these other things, but it's very rare. And they do in the meantime, and what the general practice is for most people is for beta blockers, which just blocks you from going through puberty. So if you were assigned male at birth, you would get a beta blocker, a similar one that I'm on right now, that really gets rid of the testosterone in your body. Is spirulactinate. I can't never. We call it Spiro Girl, but it's a long word, and it's like a blood pressure medicine that people also use for like acne. It's an acne medication too, but it like suppresses the amount of testosterone that your body is producing. The other beta blockers that they give people that were assigned female at birth, it stops them from growing in like breasts and everything and going through puberty. And then by the time they're 18, then you can go and expand the gender affirming care once you're an adult and you are able to give informed consent and be able to do the type of medical care that you fully want to do. Like there's so many like precautions, and like we can't just walk out and be like, I woke up today, I'm gonna get on gender affirming care. It is so many steps. Like
and all of this that you just shared with us, people can literally find online.
They can do their Googles
online, and then but it gets bad where bigots have used the internet in a way to spread misinformation in a time where media literacy is so low. You can slap something on a headline like a shade room
and make it look real.
And it don't even be real. And that's the area we live in. I'm always talking about how Zaya Wade is treated in the media, and how I don't think the Shade Room, I don't think any of them blogs, I don't think any of those places that does not have an editorial standard, especially when it comes to dealing with minors in general, posting and discussing them ever. It does not matter that their family members, their parents are public figures. And the way that you are discussing them is causing your comment section to be a bigoted, hate-fueled place where they will be able to see it as a kid, and it's not. To be fostering that type of like platform for someone to be, it's like a hot pocket of like hate, like
it's wild.
And they act so innocent, like they're not responsible for it, but they know the types of headlines and content that they're posting, and they open the space for that transphobia and for that bigotry, especially against Black women, especially against Black trans women and the LGBTQ plus community. Like Shade Room can act all day like, oh, this is just, if our audience comments this, what, you know, we have no,
we can't control our audience,
but you can filter comments, you can monitor comments, like
moderation.
You could also not report so ignorantly.
It's the
content. Choosing a certain headline, I judge every book. I love my craft. I love being a journalist. It's something that just was a calling since I was a teenager. And I take it so seriously that when I see people be like, well, this is the story. And I'm like, you could have added more context. You didn't give care to this story. You didn't care about the story enough to care. And so many of the IG blogs and the aggregate pages that people get their news from do that. So, I just say that all to say that like so many things just stoke the fans of hate. That is just really, I'm happy when I'm seeing someone that isn't hateful, which it shouldn't even be this thing of like, oh my God, it's like finding a rainbow in a storm, but it's so rare that I'm just happy and grateful for it. I've been so grateful for the Black womanhood sisterhood that I found with letting people into. I've started saying letting others into instead of me coming out, because it's more so that I'm letting others in. I'm choosing to let people in. And so I've let people into my transness and my full identity. And since doing so, some people have not been great. Some people have been full on bigoted. Some people have step back. Others, on the other hand, have stepped up in ways that I would have never expected them to, and that I cannot express how grateful for that I am. And it's just a weird batch of things that happen all at once. It's just a conversation that is, you have to be open and willing to having it and listening and understanding, and being able to look at the world outside of your own experiences to really understand. And I think that's where people start with first. You have to be willing to look beyond your own experience and yourself. Because a lot of times we're saying you don't know a trans person, and it's true, you may not. But you might actually have a person that is in your life that actually is trans, but because of the way that you talk and discuss these things, they're not comfortable enough around you. And more often than not, that is the case. There's a lot of Black people that are trans, who are on the spectrum of LGBTQ IA+, who we suppress until our adulthoods because we feel we've grown up in such religious backgrounds. We've grown up in so many places where we see if we're our full self, the love that we receive from the people that we also love becomes conditional, and it becomes not the love that we're used to. And so I always just tell people, just really look within yourself and really try to interrogate the things that we learned when we were kids. It's very much nature versus nurture. My niece, that's my little mini me. She's about to be a sophomore in high school, and like, I'm trans. It is what it is. Auntie's trans, and hey,
it just is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful to you for letting us in and for choosing to share what you do share on your platform and sharing what you have shared with us. I mean, if there's anything that I could leave the audience with, is that what you know may not be all you need to know. There might be more education that you need, but that should not stop you from learning, from asking questions, and from allowing yourself to make mistakes sometimes as we all become more aware, as we all expand our education on things. But it's also not an excuse for you not to try. It's also not an excuse for you to allow bigotry in your friend circles and in your families and in your followings on the internet. So I hope that this was a learning opportunity for the audience. And please know that like we're open to continuing the conversation, but bigotry is not a part of the conversation. Bigotry is just ignorance. So do with that what you will in our comment sections. But yeah, Daric, again, thank you so much for being with us. And is there anything that you are working on that we can support you with, that our audience can support you with, or that we should be looking out for?
I am always working. I'm officially an award-winning journalist.
Yeah.
So more of my work will be coming out, and more opportunities to really platform queer and trans voices in the work that I do. So I'm excited about that. And just following me on my socials. It's all the same. Daric Cott.
Yep.
2 T's.
And I will tag you in our episode description, so they will be able to find you everywhere.
Congratulations on your award.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And so just follow the conversation. Sometimes the best way you can educate yourself is just, if you don't know a trans person in your life, you can find someone that does have a platform as a trans person who's work. And I'm always propelling people that are also doing the work. I'm in community with these people. So following me will also give you a new perspective. I'm always told that with people that follow me, they're like, oh, I never would have thought of it that way. And I'm like, oh, well, thank you for, interrogating the way that you used to think about things. So yeah, I would just say support the work that I'm doing. The best way you really can show up for trans people, because I always want to make it clear that I'm a bit better off than a lot of my trans sisters are. Trans siblings in general, even the trans men and non-binary people, because I do have the privileges of higher education, even though I'm a first-generation college student, but I've been able to build out a future that does not require me to do work that's based in survival constantly. And understanding that we're just people, we're humans like everybody else. And we all have different paths and journeys. And so if you don't know anyone in your life, follow someone that is. Now you do.
Exactly.
And I do answer questions. There are some times where I give grace where I answer questions. There are other times where I'm just like, I'm busy. And so you won't have to figure it out, but I might share a resource where you might be able to go find the information. So yeah, just show up, be there. If you're unsure how to be the exact ally, sometimes it's okay to ask, but it's also sometimes just to sit back and watch and see where a need is needed and just be able to show up in that way. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. For everyone who's listening, you know where to find us at Good Up Pod. I will tag all of Daric's social in our episode descriptions. And of course, remember, you can join us over on patreon.com for bonus content and full video episodes over on patreon.com/gooduppodcast. With that being said, we love Ayobad, and we want nothing more than for y'all to be well-rounded, educated, non-bigoted people. Okay, this is why we started this podcast. So
literally
just think with your brains. We love y'all, and we will see y'all right back here next week on another episode of the Good Up Podcast. Deidre, tell the people, and bye.
Bye.
This season of the Good Up Podcast is sponsored by Empath Psychological Services. The Good Up Podcast is Black woman hosted and produced by Deidre Ritter and Heiza Quinones Ivory. Find us on all social media platforms at Good Up Pod. Tag us using the hashtag Good Up Tuesday, and join the VIP section over on Patreon for exclusive bonus content at patreon.com/GoodUpPodcast.